Social media stars are being used as propaganda fodder by the current administration, and that should worry every single one of us, regardless of what identity they ascribe to. My friends, before we get started, I must say thank you guys for watching this video. If you would like more of this content, be sure to like, share, subscribe, comment on this video, share this video. We're going to be reviewing the Dylan Mulvaney interview with President Joe Biden, which many people on the internet found absolutely absurd. I'm going to try to analyze it to see if there's any merit to the interview, to see if anything of substance was said, and to see if there are any lessons that rational people, can extract from it. Now, before we get started, tell you guys about a group I'm promoting, Uncensored America. They are an organization devoted to free speech. If you believe in free speech, they believe in free speech as well. They go around colleges in America promoting free speech. They host debates. They host people who have been banned or censored, hence the name Uncensored America. And they are currently hosting a debate in Knoxville, at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, between Hunter Avallone and John Doyle. Tickets are free. I encourage all of you to go out and be out there. It is going to be a wonderful evening. I may be there as well, depending on certain things, but I encourage all of you, if you believe in free speech, please support this organization at uncensoredamerica.us, and their information will be in the description down below. Now, let's get into this video. Let us watch Dylan Mulvaney interview Joe Biden.
We're going to move on now to trans rights. There have been many anti-LGBTQ+ bills introduced and enacted, outlawing things like gender-affirming healthcare and banning kids from playing sports. To go deeper into this issue, here with us today is Dylan Mulvaney, who's welcomed us into her life.
Okay, first, let's stop right here. Notice what he said. There have been many anti-LGBTQ laws and bills passed. Now, what these people who speak this language, I call it the language of simplicity. I said recently on my Twitter that you should say the most complex thing in the simplest terms, not the most simplistic thing in the simplest terms. And I think that if people understood this principle, we would have much less confusion in our culture right now, because a lot of people think simplistically, and they think if you don't say things simplistically, you're condescending them. No, I'm actually adding much needed nuance and depth to an already depth-deprived conversation. And so when he says anti-LGBTQ stuff, what he's really saying are bills that I politically disagree with. And what he is doubly saying, he is presuming that the bills are intended to go against a certain group, as opposed to outlawing a practice which, in its own independent context, would clearly be immoral, such as gender transition surgery for children. The idea that a child's innocence can be amended for a political agenda, and they can therefore be transformed by the power of medicine into something they believe they are at a very fragile young age in the mind, is immoral. It has nothing to do with any sexuality and everything to do with the preservation of an objective quality of childhood. And yet, the ideology that this emerges from, called queer theory, rejects the idea that children are innocent, and instead substitutes a counter idea of what children are, and then tries to actualize that idea by and through institutions. They use power to bring forth baleful ideas. So watch it. When language like this is spoken, you have to watch it. Because in all reality, they're actually they're being deceitful in real time. So let's continue.
On TikTok for the world to see. When people started watching and the numbers kept getting higher, I realized quickly how public my transition would be. Of course, I knew that there would be backlash and negativity. I try to not let the internet's words hurt me or my spirit. But do you know what does hurt? Seeing people in power and authority figures creating laws and bills that are actively trying to harm us trans humans, especially trans children. Our lives have become political talking points. Lawmakers in many states want to exclude us from participating in sports or getting proper health care. Some folks want to decide where we can use the bathroom. No one should have fear living in a state that they call home while being true to themselves. No one should have their lives put in danger because of who they are inside. That's why I'm sharing my story with the world. I'm using my platform to stand up for my community and for any of the little Dylans that deserve a clear path to their true identity. Mr. President, this is my 221st day of publicly transitioning.
God love it.
Thank you. I am extremely privileged to live in a state that allows me access to the resources I need, and that decision is just between me and my doctors. But many states have lawmakers that feel like they can involve themselves in this very personal process.
All right, before we even get into Mulvaney's questions to the president, I have to say a few things. Number one, the presidency of the United States is not merely a political office. The presidency of the United States is also a moral position. The president, being at the head of a government predicated upon natural law and objective reality, has to affirm certain things lest his job be in rebellion to its foundations. A house without foundations will crumble, will crash, and will be destroyed. Now, this is not to say that all presidents must think the same, but all presidents must have a baseline of values that adhere to the vision, the moral vision of the founding based in natural law. Now, what I'm saying is this. Any president that has any moral understanding, this president clearly does not. He was willing to force people to take a medicine against their will. He is willing to shut out people's ability to trade across borders to punish his political adversary, Russia. He's willing to do many different things that shows he has very little regard for the power of moral agents, the power of the individual, the moral power of the individual. But if any president had any moral understanding whatsoever, they wouldn't host someone who says the word trans children and therefore accepts that as a possibility. That is not a possibility. Not only is that not a moral possibility, i.e. children have the moral condition of being innocent, and therefore certain things are undiscernible to them, they can't understand those things, and therefore they cannot possibly understand the depths of who they are. In fact, there are people that go their entire lives without understanding who they are, much less children. So not only is it a moral impossibility, it is an absurdity because it presumes, again, a certain level of knowledge that is just not possible at a certain age. And yet the President of the United States sits in the midst of this and simply sits there, all crossed up, all poised, while conceptual and moral absurdities are spat from the mouth of an influencer who clearly either does not think about these concepts very much, or disregards alternative ideas completely, or understands that his ideas are false, or her ideas are false, or whatever, and then but does not care. Regardless of what is going through Mulvaney's head, a president of the United States should not be entertaining this. That's number one. Now, number two, Mulvaney conflated a bunch of different issues there. The issue of trans children, which, by the way, don't exist. The bathroom issue, which has been pretty much done for the past few years, as opposed to music video. That's not been a controversy for a while. The government's no longer involved in that. There are now private ministers that actually decide whether transgender folks can use whatever kind of bathroom. And most places actually have a unisex bathroom, which covers transgender folks. So this is really a non-issue in many quarters. The sports thing, which is a matter of fairness, because when you don't have certain standards for gendered sports, what do you get? You get Leah Thomas. You get Leah Thomas, someone who is not a transitioned person, going around in the women's locker room with their penis hanging out, basically bothering the female athletes, and the female athletes being ignored and written off because they're supposed to be accepting of whatever condition Leah Thomas thinks they have. You get absurdity. You get the destruction of the functions of these things. You get a revolt against reality. The biggest thing here, my friends, is this. Transgenderism, properly understood, is an aesthetic condition, not a biological amendment. Transgenderism, properly understood, is the desire to conform one's outer appearance to their inner perception and then act out that inner perception with the aid of their outer appearance. Human beings are creatures of the senses. We are creatures of empiricism. And in being a creature of empiricism, we're drawn to things we can see. Which is why, if most people see Blair White, They're not going to see a man, even though Blair White began as a man and transitioned into the appearance of a woman. They'll see a woman. So transgenderism is entirely aesthetic. And that's fine. A trans woman is still a man, but they're a trans woman. You can be a biological man and be a trans woman. If that was the conversation, fine. There would be no issue whatsoever if that was the conversation. But that's not the conversation. The conversation here is, can a trans man become a biological woman? And obviously, the answer is no. And yet, Judith Butler, in her book Gender Troubles, basically said this idea of gender has no biological basis, but rather it is a script conjured up by powerful social institutions that all of us play into. It's not real. And I can go much deeper into this, but this video is not the place for that. But that's the basic premise behind this sort of new aberrational view of transgenderism that is giving a bad name to people who are actually transgender. If someone is actually transgender, they recognize that they are not a biological woman or man. They are a aesthetic woman or man, and they act in that way. There's nothing hateful about that. It's simply what transgenderism initially meant. But now it's been changed, it's been distorted, it's been manipulated, and now it means a complete rejection of the foundations of gender, which is biological sex. Once again, a president of the United States has no business entertaining moral absurdity like this, has no business being in the presence of this nonsense. I don't care. And I really don't even care that Dylan Mulvaney is transgender. I couldn't really care. I believe in a free society. Every individual has the right to live as they want to live, provided no one is being harmed by their antics. All of us have secure enjoyment of our private rights, as the great Lord Combs once mused in his essay on the principles of morality and natural religion. And that's what I believe. That's my ethos. But the moment you begin to transgress upon the innocent, the moment you begin to alter well-established concepts, the moment you revolt against reality, is the moment the very moral basis of leaving individuals alone and keeping them safe in enjoyment of their private rights becomes endangered. If you endanger my ability to protect someone's rights by violating the very basis of those rights, then I have to fight you. I have to challenge you. I have to indict you and rebuke your ideas. That's where we are at. Let's continue.
Mr. President, this is my 221st day of publicly transitioning.
God love you.
Thank you. I am extremely privileged to live in a state that allows me access to the resources I need, and that decision is just between me and my doctors. But many states have lawmakers that feel like they can involve themselves in this very personal process. Do you think states should have a right to ban gender-affirming healthcare?
Again, this is a false premise. There is not a single state talking about banning cosmetic surgery for consenting adults. What most states are talking about right now is banning gender-affirming healthcare for children, for minors, for people who don't have the moral power, the moral faculty to consent, who are shielded by the principle of innocence, and therefore deserve the full protection of society's guardrails. Again, these false premises dictate the conversation, rephrase the conversation on emotional grounds, and then makes anybody who opposes the conversation at hand, or opposes the measure at hand, a monster, because again, you're fighting on emotional grounds, not rational grounds. This is a shift of the goalpost. This is a straw man. This is the worst of the worst when it comes to actually advocating for a position. Let's continue.
I don't think any state or anybody should have the right to do that. As a moral question and as a legal question. I just think it's wrong.
You have no right. This president has no right to talk about moral questions. This president has no regard for morality, he has no regard for conscience, he has no regard for the fundamental principles that allow a society to flourish, the principles of voluntary association, contractarianism, and free trade. This president has no business talking about morality because he has no moral basis. That's an empty word used to curry favor in the ears of those who are already sympathetic to this president.
You know, I think I was saying before we started that my deceased son, used to be the Attorney General of the state of Delaware. He passed the broadest piece of legislation that he, as Attorney General, was able to convince the legislature and the governor to sign, that dealt with all gender-affirming capability. I mean, there's a lot of, sometimes they try to block you from being able to access certain medicines, being able to access certain procedures, and so on. None of that should be available.
What medicines?
I mean, no state should be able to do that, in my view. So I feel very, very strongly that that you should have every single solitary right, including use of your gender identity bathrooms.
Okay, first of all, no one has a right to a bathroom. This president misunderstands what rights are. So let me give you guys a crash course thought history. So our modern idea of rights comes from a few theorists, but just to be simple, I'll source it to one theorist. A theorist called Francisco Suarez. I have his picture on the screen right here. Francisco Suarez was a Spanish scholastic who was one of the first theorists to acknowledge that rights actually belong to the individual. They are centered in the heart. They are as much a part of your existence as breathing is. And so Francisco Suarez had this idea and he developed it. And then what he did was he sourced rights within human beings by using the word ius, to describe rights as something belonging to you. Then Hugo Grotius, who is a Enlightenment theorist who influenced John Locke, who ultimately influenced the American founding and therefore the Constitution, had this idea that rights are not given, they belong to you, and therefore it is incumbent upon society and the government to respect those rights. That's where rights come from. They come from inside of you. They come from your heart. They come from your conscience. They come from your humanity. They do not come from your ability to use someone else's services. Someone else's services also come from their humanity. It's their property. So you do not have a right to someone else's property. That is the fundamental argument that needs to be made here. Let's keep going.
Thank you. Thank you. And it feels like Republicans have turned trans and non-binary people into this thing to blame society's downfall on in some ways. And this narrative is not only dangerous to our mental health, but also our physical safety. And particularly trans women of color are being murdered at an alarming rate.
People fear what they don't know. They fear what they don't know. And when people individuals realize, oh, this is what they're telling me to be frightened of, this is the problem, people change their minds.
What a
people
way.
People just don't know enough to know. And it's not because of intellectual incapability, it's just lack of exposure. And I think that it's really important that we continue to speak out about the basic fundamental rights of all human beings. And the idea that what's going on, in some states, I won't get into the politics of it, but in some states, it's outrageous, and I think it's immoral.
No. Okay, first of all, this president has no business talking about morality. I've already said that. He has no moral basis, no moral anchor, no moral core. All of this is empty rhetoric meant to sully the ears of those who actually like him, not actually make rational arguments to those who may be skeptical of his policies. That's number one. Number two, this idea that trans people are under assault, particularly, and the only proof they have for this is the fact that states are trying to ban gender transition surgery for minors. This idea that they're under assault because minors are being protected as they normally are protected by the general law of society is also a complete non sequitur. It's a complete straw man built upon an emotional argument which has no basis in reality. And not only that, but it shows the view of children that people who make these kind of disingenuous arguments that they have. And also, there's one more other thing to be said about all of this, and it's just really concerning that it even has to be said. But this idea that anyone who opposes this kind of stuff does so because they're afraid of trans people is also completely and utterly absurd. This is the kind of stuff we are seeing from the president and Dylan Mulvaney. Now, if you guys want to watch the rest of this video, it'll be in the description down below. You can watch it if you want to. I've walked you through how much I want to watch of it. I think you guys get the point. The president is doing a disservice to the country by doing stuff like this, disservice to the truth by doing stuff like this. It is incumbent that we are all on the guard. We are all on the guard for these kind of political ploys, these kind of rhetorical distortions. Because if we're not, people will convince you that you're a bad person just for wanting to affirm some basic sense of what is proper, what is not proper. My friends, I love you guys so much, and please like, share, subscribe, comment, and stay pensive. Bye, guys.